One, robotic before AI didn't have a lot of interest in me because it was just a box with limited capabilities. One. Two, for the last 200 years or so, human labor was the primarily input of any production. So let me, take a step back and, explain for those that don't have the background in economics. I mean, the basic foundation of economics is labor growth, meaning population growth. That is defined in how many number of kids a household can have. In order for you to grow, you need to have at least 2.2, which is pretty challenging nowadays for the rest of the world, with the exception of few countries. And productivity growth, meaning productivity growth per individual of a working age. Now, with the advent of automation, it seemed that this paradigm was mostly applicable to maybe a recently post-agrarian society, where labor was a predominant aspect of labor and capital. So as we are raising a permanent capital vehicle, I'm seeing more and more a decoupling of labor from, the general aggregate calculation of economic output or GDP, or maybe that one needs to, quite frankly, be defined. So that's why I kind of developed this interest in the economic of AI robotics. So let's talk about orchestration in more details and why Amazon was super successful in deploying AI robotics. The reason why they were successful because they did not incur meaningful integration costs, meaning they didn't use outdated warehouses and try to retrofit them, or try to not retrofit them and try to force, a fleet of robots inside them. They probably did that in the beginning and they figured out, oh gosh, it doesn't work. Or maybe it works, but you know what? A better idea is probably going forward, we need to think about the environment first. Let's design an environment that is predictable enough, that is modular enough because things change, right? That where robots can do their tasks. And I think, remember, it took them a while. I mean, Amazon is not a new company anymore. So they've been at it for 20, 30 years, maybe 20 years, right? It's only recently they fired 30,000 people, and we are in 2026, right? So that's how long it took them to kind of really figure it out to a point where they get rid of 30,000 people, period. So I think it's, the environment design that made them very, very successful in deploying robotics. And I think, other companies need to probably pay attention to that. Because the problem is not, if you don't change the environment, and another entity will start from scratch with a new environment, deploying robotics, and you're left behind. And same goes with cities, same goes with, with anything else. I mean, think about the cities of the future. So I don't know, 10, 20 years from now, if we're building, Saudi is building, a city of the future called Neom. If they build it right, there's going to be an unbelievably amazing city to live in. And of course, that's going to have a repercussion on, major cities around the world, or at least, maybe cities that are actually directly competing with it, such as Dubai, right? If you have Neom now, that is great, and Dubai is, was great, or not as great as it used to compared to Neom, then guess what? Capital will flow into Neom, companies will flow to Neom, etc. Jurisdiction will kind of adopt to it. So, and the environment, really designing the environment is actually the number one prerogative for any orchestration to properly work. One, the environment dictated that warehouses, you don't have a lot of retrofitting. So if you think about the purpose, think about the purpose, think about it from a first principle. What is a warehouse? It's a place where you store things and you kind of move them in and out, right? You don't necessarily produce things, in warehouses. It's mostly for storage, mobility, etc. So it requires a combination of tasks previously undertaken by human that are not complicated, yet some of them could be very dangerous. And a warehouse, literally, as opposed to a factory in an e-commerce driven world, needs to be operational 24/7. Let's put it this way. So a factory may not, right? We may have 2 shifts, but not necessarily. But if you want to promise somebody that I'm going to deliver you a package within 24 hours, guess what? You can't have a warehouse that is like, we'll get a wait until the warehouse opens up. So it was already operating at a 24-hour shift. So think about it from this perspective. Remember what I just said? I said in the beginning, human work 8-hour shifts, maybe 16 if you deploy 2. And so therefore their environment, the labor environment where is already conducive for, gosh, I mean, how can we have 3 shifts now? And with comes 3 shifts, comes a lot of incident, comes a lot of people's management. And these are tasks that are repetitive. So wow, maybe there's a way to kind of like reimagine how warehouses operate, especially if you have the demand for your goods and services, right? And therefore Amazon jumped on it immediately. They're like, okay, I think we probably, they probably, took a blueprint of a sort, or they probably like have one case and kind of like use it as a guinea pig, and they started small. And then once they figured it out, they probably said, this is the blueprint we're going to apply across all our warehouses. And now it's, it's pretty seamless. I always believed, like even 5-10 years ago, that and even before COVID, that I wouldn't say Amazon, because I'm not paid by Amazon, so I just want to give them more credit than probably they deserve. The last miles is also commoditized too. So think about storefronts too. I mean, they could be warehouses too, or mini warehouse, and we start seeing those as well. So the example of a warehouse is a typical example where robots are properly deployed because the environment is stable. Tasks are, fairly repetitive. There's like no new things, that, change all the time. And actually some of the tasks are dangerous too. So, a lot of these tasks that are repetitive and dangerous, you want to have a robot doing a dangerous job rather than a human being, right? For the sake of a human being, but also for the sake of liability. So that's why environment in warehouses was very conducive. And I think we should, pay attention to that. If you want to understand robotic economics, you got to be thinking about, okay, so look, I have a lot of people come to me asking about, how do we think about the economics of robotics? You think about an input output. What's the input? So energy, obviously is important. Productivity of a robot, integration cost, exponential learning, and coordination / orchestration. That is pretty much the function of every single one of them constitute the output of a robot economy. So let me repeat it again. So the output of an AI robot is a function of energy, uptime, the output, the integration cost within an ecosystem, and the coordination if you have a fleet of them. Throughout history, there's like providers of capital who owns the assets, and there were laborers, people who, operate these assets to produce an outcome of a sort. So far, the split is 65-35. So therefore, you still have a bargaining power because you cannot produce an output without human intervention. So the pie was split is you work for me, I deploy capital, capital is machine, and you create tasks along with the machine, and then boom, you produce something, I sell it at a profit, and then I pay you wages, or I split with you, and I keep the rest, me and the shareholders or provider of capital. As more and more of these tasks become automated / autonomous, then the pie that goes to labor that is undertaking these human tasks, shrink more and more, and the labor part of the value added would be marginalized to a certain extent, and therefore the bargaining power will be slowly stripped away from providers of labors, and in favor of those that own the asset. And hence we also need to kind of redesign, right? Talking about whether capitalism, the way we know it, should change, it almost have to in an autonomous society. Otherwise, you just, those who are going to own the assets, they will have less of an incentive to pay fair wages to those that are actually either involved in these repetitive tasks, or maybe those who are involved in those human tasks will have such a high value that there's no need for those that get laid off to be reintegrated within society. So how are we going to split the pie? Do we, as steward of capital, have to kind of think about a redistribution system back into the society to enable those that were replaced by the machine? Maybe. Does the machine now that is producing needs to pay taxes? Do owners of these assets need to pay more taxes? This may not be very popular opinion, but we ought to think about it in order for us to kind of constitute a society. So money has to come from somewhere. So I think whoever owns the asset will obviously control a bigger chunk of the autonomous economy. Is it a matter of jobs or ownership? So is the debate of robotics contributed to an autonomous society? I think it's both, but it's mostly a labor thing as opposed to a job. I think that we're going to have wage stagnation. I think we're going to have new jobs that are being created, but the demand for labor will be reduced. So that's two or three things happen. I think it's going to be a period of time where we need to kind of like retool society or redistribute labor across the economy, right? So that will take time, because the whole society has been built for people to do specific job that may not exist, or actually they will exist under a different shape or form. So I think the whole thing will have to be, and maybe part of the debate of those who own these assets, they probably need to maybe not pay taxes, because taxes, we all know it goes nowhere. But maybe we ought to create a different tax or system that literally allows people to kind of go back into an apprenticeship of a sort, or reform the educational system, so those at least that go to these educational system or these apprenticeship end up actually having skills that are actually of a value to an autonomous society. That's the way I look at it. I think we've seen it already. I think the internet had displaced some workers, but I don't think we saw massive unemployment. I think people retooled themselves and learn new skills and adopt it. Plus, there will be a demand for other services that may require more labor integration. I'm not a big believer that labor will completely disappear. I mean, at least demand for labor. It will shrink. We're gonna have to reimagine it, but it's not gonna disappear.